When the world was obsessed with the Ferrari Testarossa, Porsche 911 Turbo, and Lamborghini Countach during the 1980s, a car that seemed completely absurd was being built in the small Scottish town of Argyll. It was called the Argyle Turbo GT, and it was supposed to be Scotland's answer to the Italian supercars. But it was not created by a massive automotive corporation or a group of wealthy industrialists. The entire project was driven by one man, Bob Henderson, an eccentric aeronautical engineer, turbocharging specialist, and visionary who believed he could build a better car than Ferrari. The car was designed inside an old industrial laundry building hidden among the Scottish hills, far away from giant factories and advanced technology centers. The Argyle Turbo GT featured a mid-mounted engine, a birdcage-style tubular chassis, supercar performance, and futuristic bodywork that looked like a strange combination of a DeLorean, Lotus Esprit, and Maserati Bora. The problem was that the car was just as chaotic as it was ambitious. It combined brilliant engineering ideas with components borrowed from Morris Marina, Volvo, Ford, and Triumph. Some people considered it a Scottish McLaren before McLaren ever built road cars, while others saw it as an incredibly expensive kit car fantasy. Even today, nobody knows exactly how many examples were actually built. Some sources claim only 2 completed cars existed, while others mention several, or even more than a dozen. The Argyle Turbo GT remains one of the most mysterious and unusual supercars ever created in Great Britain. The story of the Argyle name began long before the Turbo GT project itself. The original Argyle Motors Company was founded at the end of the 19th century and became one of the most important car manufacturers in Britain before the First World War. The company was established by Alex Govan, who started operations in 1899. Argyle quickly earned a reputation for advanced engineering and luxurious automobiles. At one point, the brand was even the largest car manufacturer in Scotland. The factory in Alexandria was among the most modern automotive facilities of its era. The company became known for experimenting with 4-wheel brakes and sleeve valve engines long before such technologies became widespread. Unfortunately, after the First World War, the company began to decline and eventually shut down in 1932. For decades afterward, the Argyle name practically disappeared from automotive history. Everything changed during the 1970s, when Bob Henderson and rally driver Andrew Smith decided to build their own sports car. They were searching for the perfect name and accidentally discovered that the Argyle trademark had been unused for years. The name fit perfectly, a Scottish supercar created with pride and with the ambition to rival the best machines in Europe. Bob Henderson was an absolutely unique individual. He was not a traditional businessman or a conventional automotive engineer. Earlier in his career, he worked as an aeronautical engineer for short aviation, dealing with aircraft engines and advanced engineering systems. He possessed enormous knowledge about aerodynamics and forced induction technology. During the 1960s and 70s, Henderson became famous as one of Britain's pioneers of turbocharging gasoline engines. He also developed his own minnow fish carburetor, which became highly respected among tuners and performance enthusiasts. In 1974, he published a book titled Theory and Practice of Turbocharging and Supercharging, considered one of the first serious publications about turbocharging gasoline engines outside the United States. What made Henderson remarkable was the fact that he predicted the future of the automotive industry long before other manufacturers did. He believed turbocharged engines would dominate the future because they could deliver high power while remaining relatively compact and lightweight. At a time when most manufacturers still treated turbocharging as an exotic curiosity, Henderson was already experimenting with turbocharged Saabs, Austin Maxus, and racing cars. The Argyle Turbo GT was supposed to become the ultimate expression of all his engineering knowledge and his dream of building the perfect grand touring car. Development of the car began around 1976. Henderson wanted to create a machine that was fast, comfortable, and incredibly durable. Unlike many lightweight sports cars of the era, he had no intention of building a fragile machine that required constant repairs. The Argyle was supposed to be a true grand tourer, capable of covering enormous distances at very high speeds. Henderson designed an extremely complicated birdcage-style space frame chassis made from steel box sections and tubular structures. The entire construction resembled aircraft engineering more than a conventional road car chassis. Henderson intentionally over-engineered the structure because he wanted the car to last its owner 20 or even 30 years. The bodywork was made from fiberglass to reduce weight and manufacturing costs. The proportions of the car were very distinctive: an unusually long wheelbase measuring roughly 3 meters, a very low roofline, and a centrally mounted engine. Thanks to these proportions, the Argyle looked more like an Italian exotic supercar than a traditional British coupe. The dimensions of the car measured approximately 4.67 meters in length, 1.82 meters in width, and only 1.22 meters in height. Stylistically, the Argyle Turbo GT was one of the strangest-looking cars of its time. The body featured sharp, wedge-shaped lines typical of the 1970s and 80s. The front was extremely low and wide, while the headlights were hidden behind special louvered covers designed to improve aerodynamics. The rear of the car featured an unusual solution called the optical trough, a special channel that improved rear visibility despite the car's extremely low silhouette. Many journalists compared the Argyle to the DeLorean, Lotus Esprit, or Maserati Bora, although the car had its own raw and distinctive personality. Interestingly, many parts came directly from mass-produced cars built by other manufacturers. The steering wheel was borrowed from a Triumph Dolomite. The door handles originally came from a Morris Marina, and some instruments and interior components were sourced from Volvo. Henderson believed there was no reason to design every single component from scratch when reliable and affordable parts already existed. This allowed him to focus on the key areas of the car: the chassis, suspension, and powertrain. The first Argyle prototype was powered by a turbocharged Rover V8 engine with a displacement of 3.5 liters. The engine was mounted in the middle of the chassis and connected to a 5-speed ZF gearbox, similar to the units used in cars such as the Maserati Bora and De Tomaso Pantera. Henderson experimented with several turbocharging configurations, and according to some sources, the prototype produced around 250 horsepower. Considering the car weighed approximately 1,040 kilograms, the performance figures were extremely impressive. The car was said to accelerate from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in roughly 6.5 seconds and achieve a top speed of around 240 kilometers per hour. Some promotional materials even claimed speeds exceeding 250 kilometers per hour. In the middle of the 1970s, those numbers were comparable to Ferrari and Porsche performance. More importantly, journalists who drove the prototype praised not only its speed, but also its handling characteristics. The Argyle reportedly offered neutral balance, comfortable suspension tuning, and exceptional stability at high speeds. Henderson devoted enormous attention to weight distribution and aerodynamics, which made the car feel more mature and refined than many other low-volume sports cars of the era. Initially, Henderson planned to offer several engine choices, including turbocharged Saab engines. Interestingly, this was supposed to happen before Saab officially introduced its own production turbo models. However, no customer Argyle was ever completed with a Saab engine. As the project evolved toward limited production, the main power plant became the French Duvrin V6 engine, used in vehicles such as the Renault 30, as well as Peugeot and Volvo models. The engine displaced approximately 2.7 liters and was available in both naturally aspirated and turbocharged versions. Henderson believed the V6 suited the grand touring character of the car better than the heavier Rover V8. In later years, some examples were also equipped with Lancia Beta engines and incredibly rare Buick V6 units, originally intended for Indy car racing. Every Argyle was effectively hand-built and often customized according to customer requirements. There was never a single definitive specification for the car. That is exactly why it remains so difficult today to determine the precise technical details of every example built. The official launch of the Argyle Turbo GT took place in October 1983 at Inverary Castle in Scotland. It was a very unusual place to unveil a supercar, but it perfectly reflected the Scottish character of the project. Henderson wanted to create a car that felt more like a handcrafted yacht than a mass-produced automobile. The company claimed it could produce around 12 cars per year. The price ranged from £25,000 to £30,000, which was absolutely shocking at the time. A Porsche 911 Carrera cost roughly £21,000, a Lotus Esprit Turbo less than £19,000, and a Ferrari 308 GTB around £26,000. That meant the Argyle was as expensive as, or even more expensive than, prestigious supercars from Italy and Germany. The problem was that almost nobody knew the Argyle brand, and the build quality did not always justify the astronomical price tag. The interior of the Argyle was equally unconventional. The earliest prototypes had almost unfinished cabins, with very little luxury equipment. Henderson initially believed customers should choose and arrange their own interior finishes according to personal preferences. Later, the company Avon Coachwork became involved and began trimming the cabins with Scottish leather and more luxurious materials. Even then, however, the Argyle never achieved the quality standards of Ferrari or Porsche. Some components appeared improvised, and panel fitment was often inconsistent. Journalists who visited Henderson's workshop were simultaneously impressed by the ingenuity of the engineering and horrified by the chaotic manufacturing environment. The workshop itself resembled the garage of an obsessive enthusiast more than a proper supercar factory. Despite this, most people who actually drove the Argyle were deeply impressed by its driving characteristics. The car offered excellent stability, surprising comfort, and very precise steering feedback. The suspension system was one of the strongest aspects of the Argyle design. Henderson used fully independent double wishbone suspension, inspired by motorsport engineering. The setup was designed to provide both high-speed stability and the comfort expected from a proper GT car. Unlike many brutal supercars of the era, the Argyle was intended to be capable of daily use and long-distance travel. Henderson also experimented extensively with weight distribution, relocating the fuel tank and spare wheel to achieve a near-perfect 50-50 balance. Disc brakes were installed on all four wheels, while the steering used a rack and pinion system. Henderson was obsessively focused on aerodynamic details and high-speed behavior. As a result, the Argyle reportedly handled better and felt more composed than many low-volume exotic cars produced during the same period. The biggest problem facing the project was finances and production scale. The Argyle Turbo GT was essentially a hand-built supercar manufactured in a tiny Scottish town without the backing of major investors. Henderson funded the project mostly with private money and strongly disliked relying on government assistance. Development stretched on for years while costs increased far faster than the company's ability to sell cars. The timing was also unfortunate. The fuel crises of the 1970s and the economic recession severely reduced demand for expensive sports cars. Buyers spending tens of thousands of pounds preferred to trust Ferrari, Porsche, or Aston Martin rather than a tiny Scottish manufacturer nobody had heard of. Argyle also struggled with production quality and logistics. Every car differed in details, making homologation and servicing extremely complicated. Although the media showed considerable interest in the project, actual sales remained extremely limited. Even today, nobody knows exactly how many Argyle Turbo GT were actually built. Bob Henderson himself avoided giving precise numbers throughout his life. Most historians believe somewhere between 4 and 6 completed cars probably existed, although some sources mention only 2 fully finished examples, along with several unfinished chassis or prototypes. Photographs of differently colored cars exist, but some of them may simply show the same vehicles after modifications. Production continued roughly until the late 1980s or early 1990s. Henderson constantly developed the concept, experimented with new engines, and even considered exporting the car to the United States. At one point, plans reportedly existed for the production of hundreds of cars per year for the American market. But these ambitions never materialized. Ultimately, the Argyll Turbo GT remained a niche and almost mythical project, known mainly to enthusiasts of obscure British performance cars. The modern value of the Argyle Turbo GT is almost impossible to estimate accurately. The cars appear publicly extremely rarely, and several examples remain in the possession of private collectors or Henderson's own family. Due to the car's extreme rarity and fascinating history, its value today could be enormous. If a well-preserved example appeared at a major auction, the price could likely exceed several $100,000, and an exceptionally original car might even approach $1 million. For collectors, the Argyll possesses everything desirable in a unique automobile: rarity, a compelling backstory, handcrafted construction, an eccentric creator, and the status of a nearly forgotten supercar. At the same time, the car is incredibly difficult to maintain because many parts are unique, documentation is incomplete, and numerous components were handmade. That makes the Argyle feel more like a piece of engineering art or an experimental machine than a conventional collector car. The Argyle Turbo GT remains one of the most fascinating examples of automotive courage and madness from the 1970s and 80s. It was a car created by a man who believed more in engineering than in marketing, and trusted his own ideas more than corporate procedures. Henderson attempted to build a Scottish supercar capable of competing with Ferrari and Porsche, despite lacking a massive budget, dealer network, or industrial infrastructure. The result was imperfect, chaotic, and at times almost absurd, but also incredibly ambitious. The Argyle never became a commercial success, yet today it symbolizes an era when a single passionate engineer could still dream about building his own supercar and actually bring that dream to life. In today's automotive world, dominated by giant corporations and billion-dollar budgets, the story of the Argyle Turbo GT feels almost unreal. And that is exactly why this strange Scottish machine remains so extraordinary.